interesting thing is I was a COBOL TA in college, and my first programming course was on punch cards. So I can teach you about COBOL if you want to know. Okay, so my name is Ingy.net. I'm an open source hacker from Seattle. I have a partnership called We Street LLC, and we just take on fun contracts. My current contract is with a web hosting company called Liquid Web. They're out of East Lansing, Michigan, and I work remotely for them. So some of my interests are YAML, Acmeism, modules, and the terminal. So I'm one of the inventors of YAML. Who's used YAML at all? YAML's a data serialization language for you who haven't used it. And how many? All right, so raise your hand again. Now, keep your hand up if you've done anything with YAML that doesn't involve configuration files. Okay, so about half went down. So tomorrow I'm giving a talk about YAML at 11 a.m. in room LA 101, and I'm going to tell you 10 things that you don't know about YAML. So Acmeism is my programming philosophy. It's about programming your best ideas in all programming languages at once. Well, maybe not at once, but getting them to all communities. Because I see languages as groups of real people, and instead of giving them something that says, hey, you can use this tool if you switch your whole ideology over to mine, it's actually about taking your idea and actually writing it in Python and writing it in Java and writing it, it's a painful path, but with some tools and automation, it's a good future. It's about sharing ideas as modules, as GIFs. And that's what I do. I started out in Perl, and I have on CPAN over 180 modules. I've written modules or packages for Python, Ruby, Perl 6, Node.js, and even in Bash on something called bpan, which is a fledgling thing of my own. So I do almost everything in the terminal. In fact, this whole presentation is in the terminal. No pictures of cute babies or weird things that I don't know about. This is called Vroom. I wrote it in Perl about 10 years ago, and it's about giving slideshows in the terminal. And then a couple years ago, I wrote something, I think maybe it was last year, I wrote something called Live Demo, because when you actually have to type in commands in another terminal and run stuff, you get all nervous and it doesn't work so good. And then two other commands I've written for the terminal are git-hub and git-subrepo, and that's what this talk is about today. So let's talk about GitHub. Okay, so who uses Git in the room? I assume everyone, since you're here. It's after, like I said, I started on punch cards, and I've seen everything from no version control that I did for 10 years, at work to CVS. I've done things with RCS that preceded CVS up through Subversion. Greg Stein is the author of Subversion, and I hung out with him. He's a cool guy, but he's still in denial that Subversion is dead. At least he was the last time I saw him a few years ago. He's like, no, it's really big in the enterprise. And I'm like, come on, man, let it go. It was a good idea at the time. So Git has a really solid core model, and I was talking with Dan, a terrible interface over it. Well, not terrible, but it's kind of just a mishmash. But at the center, it's as solid as, say, a file system is. Tons of commands, and so it looks like Git is one. Here's the common things that you do, and you do all of those from a terminal. Well, there's some Windows interfaces and whatnot, but most people, who uses Git only from the terminal, or at least uses Git from the terminal, and who doesn't use Git at all from the terminal? So everyone. So this is a great talk. Nobody here doesn't use the terminal. And everybody who uses GitHub, pretty much everyone, great. So GitHub, I think, is great. I mean, they really got their model down. They just got everybody to join because they were great. I mean, they actually have a lot of things. I filed bugs that, like back in the day, I wanted to get YAML support as syntax highlighting. So I got on IRC and I mentioned it, and 3 minutes later, it was supported. Now they're so big that, it's eventually somebody else is going to write something better because GitHub is going to become too big to move, kind of like, Microsoft is too big to move. But they don't really lock you in any way. It's like you put all this stuff here. You get to use their neat stuff, but at the end of the day, you could just pull it off and move it elsewhere. When projects get really big, you get into their issues system, and now you'd have to migrate all of your issues out, but that's all manageable if you really wanted to get away from GitHub. So I think it's great. So it's all from the web browser, and that's a big frowny face, because if you spend your whole day interoperating with GitHub and your only way is to do it is through their browser, you've lost. So it's not really a bad web UI, it's just that web is not a good tool for doing automated stuff at all, let alone just adding 5. Imagine like adding 5 collaborators to 5 repos, and what would you do? You know, that would be in the morning, and then you'd have to schedule everything for after lunch, because that's when you'd be done. Yeah, so try adding all of the Perl 6 organization members to 10 new repos. That would take you probably the rest of the year, because, well, you just kill yourself at some point during that time. Yeah, let's try it. Okay. So we can create a new repo called, we'll call it demo. Okay, so let's start with 4D47. We have to add him as a collaborator. So now I have to go to settings, find collaborators, confirm my password. Then I type in 4D, what was that? 4, oh, there he is, Matthew. Why don't you just go by Matthew? Add a collaborator. Okay, who's next? So that's nonsense, right? Okay. Watch this. See how great I can type? I can't type at all. I can just type like this, but this is a tool I wrote. Okay. So I was supposed to take that -D off. And I don't know if I can do this. Let's see. Okay. We created a new repo. And okay, so now we're going to take all of the members of the Perl 6 organization and trust them to this. And actually, these people are all going to kill me because they're probably going to get notifications, so I'm going to stop with those 5. I've had, anyway, that's why I put the -D. So the -D says don't actually run this, and when I'm writing the thing and testing everything, I don't run it because I know I'll get in trouble, because it happened before. Okay. Boom. Okay, so GitHub is a new Git command, and you can get it at ingy.net/github and git-hub on GitHub. You can do that now if you want. It has dozens of useful commands. You can do all of your daily GitHub. You can do about 97% of all of your daily GitHub activity from the terminal now. It uses GitHub's v3 API, which is amazing and awesome. One of the best REST APIs I've seen. Super easy to install. Here's how you do it. You clone it and you source the absolute path name to the init script that's in the repo. And if you want to make that, that'll make it installed for that shell. If you want to install it permanently, then you just add that source line to your shell RC file. Later on, you can say GitHub upgrade, and it'll pull in the new stuff, and it's all good. Yes?
So is this implemented like in terms of shell scripts, or is it something that, like when you run the git command, it's able to then find these subcommands?
Both.
Okay.
I'll explain later how git subcommands are written. It's written the same as any git subcommand, and those subcommands can be in any language, and that kind of answer. Okay, so there's a bunch of groups of commands. There's users and organizations that have teams and members and all that thing. So you can do all of these activities. There's stuff for interacting with repos. You can star other repos, trust, get a list of your collaborators, etc. Clone, fork, create new stuff, delete stuff. I ran the test for this, and I made a mistake in the test, and it actually deleted GitHub from the face of the earth. And I'm like, oh, that's not bad because I still got, I'm like, wait, no, I just lost all of my issues. I lost everything surrounding it that GitHub provided. I'm like, I'm screwed. So I got on IRC and I begged some guy and he's like, just file a support ticket and wait. And like an hour later, they fixed it. So even when it says, don't do this, we can't recover it, they can, and they will. So, because it happens all the time. And now, so I didn't really safeguard the code so that you have to type in the name of it because it has defaults. So that's one thing that I safeguard. But I don't say, are you really sure or anything, because I think that's bullshit. The only thing I did was I made sure that it couldn't delete itself. So if I try to use it to delete itself, it'll say suicide is not an option. And then, let's see. Okay, so this is commands for handling issues and pull requests. It's really great. I was saying in the Git talk the other day that I like to keep my Git history really clean, a flat line, using rebase and that kind of thing. But if you actually use the merge button from the web UI, you'll get a merge commit with a little bump. So I don't do that at all. I just I'll do a PR fetch, rebase it, and then merge it in if I like it, or make some changes and then merge it in. It's a really great workflow. The issue stuff is really great for reading issues. I can read all the issues. I'll show you in one command all the open issues, and I do that a lot. Here's some other things, like you can say GitHub keys your username and it'll print your public SSH keys. Did you know that? GitHub publishes all of your public SSH keys. I do things all the time where I create a remote VM and then I create an account for somebody because I know their GitHub ID, and then I just tell them to SSH in, and they never ask them for a password, and they usually never even ask why. I mean, even some security dudes, they're like, but yeah, I just lifted their public key off of GitHub. It's great. It doesn't always work. Some people isolate their keys and stuff, but it works a lot. Here's some of the command options that you can use, and these are actually pretty interesting in seeing how it works, especially the capital letter ones. Will show you it'll show you the raw curl rest stuff that it's doing to get the info and parse it out and display it. So it has plugins. The help system is really great. The help system is really cool because I wrote a new markup language that's better than Markdown called Swim, but I can actually chop that up into bash functions that get called when you make a command error. So I can find the documentation on that command and print it out to you. It formats as man pages and as web docs and all that kind of stuff. You never have to deal with Swim to use this, but I just mentioned it. And all of this is written in bash. Now, it didn't have to be. Git commands can be written in anything, and I just started down this path, and I thought I would only last a day, but bash is actually my new favorite programming language, and I programmed in a lot, as you know. For some things, for writing command line utilities, I write stuff, and I challenge you to look at some of these bash things and write it better in Ruby. You can't. Because if it has anything to do with process integration, the whole IPC thing of bash is you put something in parens, it's in a subprocess. You put a pipe character between things, and it's piping flawlessly. There's a lot going on under the hood, so bash is really... certain things really suck, like getting the length of an array is just a ridiculous format. But if you just Google Stack Overflow, Google and end up at Stack Overflow for how do I do this JavaScript thing in bash, there'll be an answer, and eventually you'll build up everything you need to know to become a pro bash programmer. Okay, let's try some commands. Okay. So this is going to be user information about me. That's my GitHub ID name. Okay. So that's just some basic information about me. Now, if I just type user without me, it's still going to get ingy.net because the config file with my token commented out there, that's my thing. You can see my login is. So anytime it needs a default login, it uses that one. Here's the basic help. This is just the quick cheat sheet thing that if you do a GitHub -h, This is the helper that tells you the different help commands you can do. This is a list of all of the commands. There's, I think, 60 some. 60 commands. Is that the? Yeah. Anyway. And it's really easy to add commands yourself. I'll show you that later. Here's the complete documentation written in Swim, turned into a man page. You can see it's quite extensive. It's also the README on the repo, that kind of stuff. Okay. So this is the help for a clone command, and if I were to make a mistake on a clone command, you'd get that same help stuff printed out, so that's pretty neat. It has tab completion as well. Git provides a lot of cool stuff that help writing stuff in Bash, like the get-up parsing for Bash is better than I've used in any language, and it's provided by Git. And since I'm writing a Git command, I can use that, because I know I'm going to have it. And basically, you just it's kind of like Python's doc-opt, if you've seen that. Anybody seen that? Basically, you just write out what your error message kind of should look like if you wanted to get a usage message. It parses it all out and makes a processor for you. So this is David Oswald sitting there. Raise your hand. He's my friend from the area. He's from Sandy, and we worked together on some Perl stuff, and he got me into this. Got me to drive all the way from Seattle. It was a pain in the ass. You're welcome.
We offered to fly.
Yeah, that's true. You did offer to fly. I wanted to bring my bicycle and ride around. Okay, so now we're in his repo. Now if I say GitHub user, it's going to default to him. And if I say GitHub repos, it's going to show me his repos. Now if I'm in here and I still want to see my user information, I can just type in my user name. Oops. Or I can explicitly say his ID. Now I made @ be a short way of Ingy.net. Mine is especially long, so I type really slowly, even though it looks like I'm typing fast. So @ just becomes Ingy.net in here. Okay, and I have it's actually I have a few repos. Anyway, we'll quit. Okay, so now this whole live demo thing is it's actually a repo. You can check that out. Okay. Okay, so now he has 0 stars. This is just some project he wrote. Not for long. I just started his repo. So now he has 1 star in his repo. Boom. And now I will follow him because he's such a great guy. Ingy.net is now following D.A. Oswald. So open is pretty cool. It actually opens whatever repo you're in a browser. And that's, you can read about 8 letters later on your own time. GitHub URL will show you the URL, and you can do it for any file in the system. And I think you can even add a line number. Oops. All right, it's not working. It's got bugs. Okay, so I was talking about the flags. So -v is kind of cool because it shows you the curl command with the token commented out, I think. Yep, that other thing is a e-tag thing. So that's the curl command that was used to get this. And the response for that, okay, here's this running the same thing and with a -d shows it's just a dry run only. Here's the headers that I got back on the response. Come on. Or not. Yeah, so those were the headers that came back. Useful when debugging this, I don't know how useful it would be for you, but this is kind of useful. You can see the actual raw JSON packet that came back from that request. And this is the parsed JSON. So now, if I wrote this all in Bash, and I'm getting all this stuff back in JSON, and you can kind of cheat and grep stuff out, but that's not really cool. So I actually wrote a full-on JSON parser in Bash. And since since Bash does not have hashes or arrays that are usable like, say, Ruby or Perl or whatever would have. It does have things that they call hashes and arrays, but they don't work the way you want them to. So another way that you can parse stuff is to parse each leaf node as a line and put a hard tab between the key path, and that's what I do here. So you can see I get back all this information, and I create this format. Now I can grep through that and get out the values that I need. Anyway, this is just, and you can, that was just to show you that you can combine those one-letter forms all together, and it's easy to type. Okay, this is kind of cool. This is the best part about Bash, is this -x triggers a set -x in Bash, which prints out every command before it runs. So that was every Bash command that was actually run. It's really great for debugging. If I want to know where something failed, it's not hard to find because I can just see everything. Okay, now this is the best part of the GitHub thing. Actually, I can just hit tab. I don't have to fake hit all these keys anymore. Just there, boom. Okay. Okay, so these are David's repos. I'm just going to show you again. And then, okay, so I'm going to take the first 5 in a raw format. So the raw format says, leave all the other stuff away. Just give me the names of the repos. Now this is really useful because I can pipe this into another command. So I'm going to star all of these repos. The minus on the second command says, read a line from standard in and apply whatever value you get, which we know is going to be those 5 values we see up there, one at a time. So it's going to loop over that. You're welcome, David. Yeah. And now I'm going to unstar them. Well, I don't want, I don't want fake love out there. I have to check these things out. Actually, I should start inline CPP because that's the thing we've worked together for the last 15 years. Oh, yes. Sorry, I unstarred that. I'll get to that later. Okay, so now we'll go into the GitHub repo, and now I'm going to show you. So this GitHub actually has a lot of open repos. Issues, and these are all of them. I have a lot of stuff going on, so if somebody wants to send me some pull requests, that would be appreciated. But here, this is really cool. So the raw form of that is just the numbers. Well, that's not very useful, is it? Well, it is if you... Okay, so here's one specific issue, and it shows all of the comments on the issue. So up at the top, we have the issue, and then we have comments. So that's all of the information that you would want for interacting with this issue. But what if I wanted to see all of that for all of the open issues? Well, all I would have to do is pipe the raw stuff that gives me all the numbers into this and specify the number where the minus is. And then and whenever, for most of the commands, if it goes bigger than a page, it automatically puts you into a pager. So right here, I woke up, had my morning coffee, I want to see what my open issues are for, and then I just read through them, find the ones that are interesting to me, and, go work on them, maybe, or maybe just drink more coffee and ignore them. Okay, so who knows Mojombo? Who's heard of that guy? Huh, interesting. Well, he's the one who started GitHub. He's the original GitHub user. So he was a very popular guy until he got had to step down for sexual misconduct or something. So anyway, he still, despite his failings, has almost 18,000 followers. So now, check this out. So we're going to take all of those in their raw form. Now we're going to get all of the followers of all of those followers. So that would be, I don't know, 1 million followers or something like that. We're going to pipe that into, this is where it breaks down. Okay, we're going to pipe that into sort, pipe it into unique, get all of the unique followers of all of the followers of the most popular GitHub guy ever, and we're going to follow those people, all in one command. Well, yeah, right? Okay, so now I'm going to show you a little bit about what's going on under the hood. So who's ever seen the command? Oh, we're doing pretty good on time, aren't we? Who's seen the exec path command for Git? Or I'm sorry, the option. It's not very useful unless you're a a Git command developer. Basically, well, I'll just type it over here. Actually, I thought of this when I wrote this. If I live demo can escape too, so it's a real mode. Okay, git -exec. This is how fast I usually type. Okay, it just gives you the name of this directory where all of your Git commands are stored, and that's all of them, like clone and all that stuff. So let's run that again. Okay, so those are all the normal Git commands, and you'll see hub is in there probably. Oh no, wait, I uninstalled it this way. I don't. If you do a sudo make install for GitHub and install it that way, it would end up in here. So you see all these commands are mostly symlinks to something called Git. Well, Git is the main Git binary, and so here's how Git was made. Linus or Linus or however you prefer to pronounce it. I say Linus because that's normal to me. Because I watched the Peanuts growing up. It was Linus, right? He wrote it in Perl, and basically he wrote a framework where you would say git foo, and it would actually just call some script called git-foo. And you could actually, back in the day, all of those things were in the path. So you could actually type git-foo, and it would be the same as typing git space foo. It was just a simple trick. But what that allowed you to do is write all of these utilities in different languages, and that allows you to get more help when you're doing something new and, you know, kind of crazy before it, you know, becomes, you know, the core of everything. So, and that's how it was written, and it still works that way. But eventually they're saying, hey, let's write this all in C. People are really using this, and it needs to be faster and whatnot. So they did, and that's all in the Git binary. And so they just symlink to that, and then the Git binary looks up and sees, oh, what fake name was I using? What symlink name was I using? I'll do that part of my C library stuff. But not all of the commands are written that way. Like git credential cache is written in some other language. It might be Perl. Some of these are still written in Perl. And some of them are written in other languages. Some of them are shell or bash. One was called git-subtree. That's one that I looked at, and that's the first time I saw that something was written in bash, and I was like, I wonder if I could do this in bash and how that would turn out. And so, so I wrote this command called GitHub. So here is all of the code. This is the GitHub binary, and it's a bash script, so you can see it runs bash. I mean, if we look through it, so that's the string that that creates the option parser that I was talking about earlier. It's similar to the string you saw that was printed out on the screen, but it's not the same. It actually reformats this into a better help screen that puts dashes in front of the options and whatnot. And then it creates a parser, and you hand it your argv, and it hands you back it in a parsed form that's very normal and that you can loop through easily. It's really great. So this code might not look fantastic to you, but it doesn't look, it looks pretty modular, right? I mean, it looks like pretty similar to maybe some Ruby code that you would write, a little bit more verbose, but not bad. Well, let me actually show you. So this is just all the core stuff. I put all of the commands into separate files, and they're all under here. And I grouped them together. So let's look at all the repo commands. Anything like repos, repo new, everything like that would go under here. Okay. And so here's the repos command that lists all of the repos. And it's just these two functions. And so here is report list ends up calling curl. This is the URL that it needs. And these are the three things that it's going to grab out of the payload. It's going to get pushed at, which is a date. It's going to get the full name, and it's going to get the description. And then it'll, once that's retrieved and that stuff is pulled out, it will look for the repos command with, you know. So this colon here, this is an interesting part about bash. It's just a regular symbol for the function name. The function name, there is no name spacing in bash, but you can create your own if you're clever, because nobody uses colon because they don't think they can. So I prefix all these things with command, but it's really just one string. Now variables only use the normal word character and underscore. Well, underscore is a word character, so they just use word character stuff. But the functions you can get really creative with. And think about it. When you run something at the command level, it could be a file name, which can be just about anything, right? Because it's just going to look it up in bin, or it could be a function that was defined this way in the shell. And so they really need to use that character set. So I take advantage of that. This is the stuff that gives you all the information about a repo. And so these are all the fields that I print, and then I call report data. So I just basically started writing this stuff and refactoring it so I could get these core command support really, really small. And so, setlist is something that I use in Vim that makes dash a word character, so I can actually, if I search on something, it doesn't stop it, just repo it. But it doesn't get colon, which is a shame. So. Okay. I think, unless anybody has some questions on how Git subcommands work, does that make sense the way I said it? And I've actually, oh yeah, go ahead.
Question on subcommand. So I can say git help in the name of a subcommand and it brings up the help. So does your framework then allow it to do that? So it fits in with the other Git commands?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I did everything to make sure that worked. And so and it also to make sure that the command completion worked the same as the other Git commands and that kind of stuff.
The usage string you had in there allows that to work?
I had to write various makefile support, and if we actually look, so this init script this is what you do to install it in your. I actually got this as a contribution from somebody else, and I really appreciate it because they did the Z shell stuff for me. And so this is all written in Bash, but of course, you can run something in Perl. And who uses Z shell here, or Z shell, I guess, for your Commonwealth of files? Well, this is just under the script. It's just running that, and it could be, Perl's the same way. It's like if you couldn't run Perl under Z shell, it wouldn't work. So that's just because this is Bash doesn't mean it doesn't run under Z shell. But when you actually have to do things like command completion, then you have to actually work at the Z shell level. And this is the thing that makes sure that all of the man pages and the everything is in the right place. So I think for the man pages, it just sets the right variable. I'm not really sure, but it all works. Yeah. I'll show you that.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
What level of bash do you presume in your scripts? Like, am I going to be able to run this on a 2005?
That's a great question. So I presume the bash that man on the back has. So Apple uses a bash 3.2 point something from 2007-ish, and I think they won't move forward because of licensing issues. I think they switched GPLs at some point, and they can't do it, so they're stuck on this old bash. And so everything that I write in bash, I'm stuck at that point. There's a few things, it's really not that much actually, but there's a few things I can't use in modern bash that I'd like to be able to use. But one problem with bash is getting stuff to work on Windows. Now, there's this Windows environment for Git where they actually compile in a bash 3.1.
Is that WinGW?
I think it's msysgit maybe or something like that. I don't know. I have some open tickets on that stuff. They use a 3.1 which doesn't have regex support, and I really don't want to roll my own regex support. So, and they really don't want to go to bash 3.2. They're like, somebody said, effectively they looked into it and they're like, yeah, the guy said that it will be that way for eternity or something. Like, all right, well, guess we're at a deadlock for now. Okay. Okay, so now we're in the GitHub repo. I can say make test, and this is running my my test suite and all this stuff. It is tested. This is really just running Perl's prove minus v. Now Perl's prove is really cool because it just looks at the hash bang and goes, oh, this is bash. I'll just run this script as bash. In Perl, for people who don't know, Perl uses this test framework called TAP, and it's been ported to a lot of other places. And basically, tap is just an output format that a harness grabs and looks at. And here's the raw version of the tap. So tap just says OK or not OK, and the number of the test, and then the label of the test. And then the harness puts all that information together that it's reading from standard out, and prints up a nice report at the end. So in order to do this, there was no bash test or tap testing framework, so I wrote one, and it wasn't too hard. I mean, and it's right there. Test more, and then I had to write a JSON parser, and that's another repo. And then I wrote this thing called bash plus that gave me just a few things that I wanted. Like I wanted to, so if you source a file, that's kind of like a require from Node or from Ruby, or a use from Perl or whatever. It's basically pulling in another function. But the one thing it misses is actually exporting some things that you want. So I wrote my own use command that just does a little bit more. It sources the file, but then looks at its export list and brings stuff into my namespace. I wrote a die command instead of just an echo and exit, because I'm like always asserting things. I'm like, if this doesn't work or if this isn't true, die. And it would have just, and actually if I don't use bash plus, I just write my own little die function at the top of everything I write in bash. That's the first thing I do if I'm just doing something off the cuff, because I know I'm going to need it. Now, interestingly, all three of these directories are subrepos, git subrepos, and that's the next command that I want to talk about. So these are all subrepos of the GitHub repo. And I put subrepos for my stuff under an ext directory, so external. Actually, in all the languages that I've done, this moo is some garbage, but I've adopted the same top-level directory structure, because what I'm actually trying to work towards, and I was telling Dan a little bit about this, is I publish frameworks in 4 different languages, and I could do more, but I just don't have the time. What I want to do is single source all of that. So for YAML, I want to write a YAML library that I write one set of tests, one set of code, one set of docs. Docs is the hard part. And then I do like a make publish, and it publishes it to 20 different languages, CPANs or Ruby Gems or whatever. I want to automate all that, and I've been working on this for 5 years, but it's like, just like one guy. So, some of the stuff that comes out of it gets popular, and it's a long bootstrapping process. But this is really what I kind of want to do before I die, is write modules in, I call it, everybody's used CoffeeScript or heard of it. CoffeeScript is a really nice syntax that compiles to JavaScript source. And I am writing something called CafeScript that compiles to 20 different sources. And that's probably brings, if you want to catch me later and talk about that and tell me why that won't work, I'd be glad to talk to you about it. Okay. So git subrepo is another new Git command that I wrote. It's available there. And basically, it's a sane replacement for Git submodules. So who's used submodules here? Really? I mean, if you're tired of raising your hand, come on, just at least raise your hand on this one. Okay. So not everybody's used them, and but they're really probably the most painful part of the Git stuff that's actually commonly used. So basically, in SVN it was called externals. I don't remember what it was called in other source control systems, but basically it's this idea that you have this repo, but it always needs this other repo. So why can't I just, when somebody clones it, why can't it just pull in all these other repos as well? And so, and they added it much later. I don't think Linus was involved at all in adding submodule support. And it was added as a hack, and it was added as such a hack that it just has to keep propagating itself as a hack. So it really falls, like all the commands for Git normally work in an expected way, and submodules do not. I'm not going to say too much more about it. I mean, there's plenty on the internet. You can read about that. Let's look at, I was going to make slides for this. So this is, but then I'm like, it's all in this doc. So I'll blow it up a little bit. Okay, so there's not a million subrepo subcommands. There's only about 10. So the basics are you can clone in an external repo, and I name them all after real Git commands that already exist, and they do work basically like their real Git counterparts. You clone a subrepo into a subdir. When you want to get the latest content, you pull it in. When you want to make changes locally and push it back to the other one, you push it. And then the next three are more when you have to do stuff like conflict resolution and stuff. You use fetch, branch, and commit and that kind of stuff. And then status is gives you all the information about the subrepos that you're using in a repo and where they're at. And clean. So all kinds of Git commands put things under refs, and they put things in the .git config file. They put remotes and that kind of thing. And so subrepo is pretty, uses those same features, but sometimes you're like, yeah, I don't want all this subrepo stuff in here, just all these pointers to stuff, so clean just removes them, because they can all be created from the stuff. All of the information is in solid places, but this just make other commands easier to use. Okay. So here's the situation that I had. Now, I was talking to this guy, Dan, that's sitting right there. He uses something where he has, why don't you say how you use it? You have a repo that...
So I do a lot of presentations over for Mozilla in developer relations, and one of the things I want to be able to do is have kind of, all right, I want to use reveal.js for my presentation, so I want to be able to reference that, but I also want to be able to pull in repos that have code examples and things like that all live and are independent pieces of software, but I want to end up with a single repo that someone clones, and they can see my entire presentation with all the supporting code, all the third-party libraries, etc. And I've had just nightmares trying to get that with submodules.
Mm-hmm. So that's a really great use case, and that's a really solid one for subrepo. Where I use it is in that situation I just showed you, where I'm creating a new thing in Bash, but I'm also creating tools that this Bash thing needs that don't exist yet. And so I'm actually tweaking all 4 of those repos at once, and I'm like, well, where do I tweak them? Do I tweak them over here and then pull it in? Well, that kind of sucks, so I really want to do it all where it's working, and then get it out to the right places eventually. Or maybe I have 3 of these different projects that are using the same 3 submodules, so I do some work over here, and I'm like, oh yeah, I really need to pull that in over here, and that kind of thing. This makes it really easy. So I thought of 3 roles, and this is really good to think about the roles that are going to be using some command that you're making. So there's the owner, that's me, and then there's users, that's everybody in the room who just wants to grab the stuff and start using it. When you grab GitHub, it's going to, all of the subrepos are part of that, so you're just going to get it. But other than that, you don't really care that they're subrepos. And then there's collaborators. Now, in this case, collaborators can push to the main repo all they want, but if they actually want to push to the subrepo and they have the commit rights to do that, then they're a little bit different, and I treat them a little bit different. So these are the advantages of it. It's very simple and intuitive. The users get your so in submodules, people have to run extra commands to get the submodules. So if they're just using the thing, they have to clone it. If they say clone minus recursive, or they always do that, then they'll get it all. But like if they don't, then they have to read the documentation and go, oh, it needs submodules, or something's going to tip them off that they need the submodules. Then they have to learn submodules again, and all the, it's a painful route. The users never need to install subrepo. It's only the owners and the super collaborators, I would call them, the collaborators who actually want to push back to not only work on the main repo, but push back to the subrepos, are the only people who actually need this command on their system. And that's why I'd never put it into core. I'd never even entertain the thought of putting it into core, because that would lock it into some old version that I wrote, whereas this is only needed by the people who are actually creating things, and it's already easy to install, and only a few people need it. So yeah, so like if you don't need to know about it, you don't need to know about it, and if you do, then it's simple as can be. Okay, the installation is the same as the other one, and then this explains the commands. So okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about Git from the bottom up. This was the best PDF that I ever found on the internet explaining Git, for me anyway. It's a really great read. Just search for Git from the bottom up and read this thing. Basically, it explains Git as it's constructed at the lower level, not all the hundreds of commands that are put on top of it. And those are usually called the porcelain. And this isn't even the plumbing, because the plumbing is the commands that interact with the model. The model is what I'm describing here. So there's only 3 things. There's really 4 things, but one is not as that. It's just not core. So there's 3 core things: blobs, trees, and commits. And in a file system situation, you have blobs and trees. That's all you have is files and directories. Commits are the state of a certain tree at a certain point in time. And so blobs contain your file content. I mean, sometimes they're symlinks and they have, little flag settings for dealing with that or whatever. There's different kinds of blobs, but usually they're just files. Trees point at blobs, but they also point at other trees, which are subdirectories. So it's the exact same layout as your working directory as your tree structure for a git commit. And a commit is just a pointer to one tree that might point to all these other trees. That one tree is your top level directory for that repo. And then the commits chain together. And so you have a tree at one state, and that's the commit that represents it. And a tree, you move it to the next state, and that's the commit that represents it. And when you have 2 of these and you pull them together, so a commit can point to one or more parents. And when it points to more than one, then it's what's called a merge. And the hard part of the Git internals that I don't even understand is basically that the tree that's now on this one commit after a merge has to be representative of what the programmer wanted by taking these 2 things and smashing them together, those 2 trees together. And that's where all the merge conflicts and all that hard stuff lives. But I didn't have to worry about any of that, so I haven't learned it yet. Now, this is all very sane. And it's just a way to set things up. It's really brilliant. So submodule changes something at this level. Like, you can't change anything at this level. And I found this out digging in. They have trees point to commits. And you're like, what? And you're like, oh yeah, because a commit is like this external thing, and now it's a part of my tree. And so I'm just, yeah, that kind of makes sense, right? Oh yeah, that's pretty clever, yeah? No. So why isn't this clever? It's not clever because now you have hundreds of commands built over this model that never expect this situation to happen ever, right? And so now the submodule command, well, it's just like the only person that has to, or the only command up there that has to worry about this new structure, because the others will just ignore it. They won't expect it, so they won't see it, and that's fine. But now you're like, oh, but this command should really work with clone, should now really work with submodules. Oh, well, we're going to have to add support and teach it about this other structure. Oh, well, pull and push need to, so it just cascades out. And every new command that foolishly tries to do something without submodule support, or maybe not foolishly, is going to need to know about this stuff. So it was just a recipe for disaster that somehow got in because they needed it. Who knows why it got in? I don't know the history. But it throws all the subcommands off balance and causes pain. Now, this is kind of a little aside, but here is how to cheat GitHub on the who owns a GitHub account with private repos? Does anybody do that? Okay, a couple. So there's a couple of things, like I have those 500 some open repos, but there's some things that I just needed to keep private for some reasons. Mostly contract work related, or stuff that had passwords or something in it. But so for $7 a month, I get 5 repos, and that's the minimum one. And I'm like, well, I really don't. Then I needed that 6th one, and I'm like, do I really have to pay, another whatever it was for that? So here's the deal with Git. That whole history of commits, under the refs directory, there's a pointer to that says this is master. You can have 1,000,000 histories in one repo, and they can all, as long as they have a pointer, you can get to them. In fact, I could go into any repo right now and fetch every other repo that anybody in this room has all written. I could just fetch those, and they wouldn't have pointers, but all that content would be in there for 30 days until the garbage collection said, oh, these aren't pointed to. But if I created pointers for that, I could create a repo that had every repo that everybody in this room has worked on under one repo. and I could just set a branch name to that, and I could treat the branch as a separate repo. So I do that. So it's a poor man's way of getting as many repos as I want under my private repos account. Now it's... What was that?
Poor man's.
Oh, poor man's. I thought you said 4 minutes. I'm like, oh no. But it is about 4 minutes, so that's okay. So it's really not a cheat because all of the other services, forget like all of your issues and stuff, they're only going to treat the one main repo. So, but for private stuff, you really don't use issues. You don't have, so it actually works out pretty well. Well, this is how subrepo works. It just takes some external thing, pulls the history in with a fetch. A fetch pulls everything in, and then what I do is I take the commit history and I prune it off because I only want the top one with the most recent tree. I can still get at the history because I know where it came from and I know where that history lives off somewhere else. So I can get at it, but I want to keep my history really clean. Then I check out that stuff into a subdirectory and I do some git commands that just add this as a new commit with that new subdirectory. Now, using I forget this git. What's the git sub command that used for rewriting history?
Rebase or rebase squash?
No, it's not a porcelain command. It's something I can't remember. Some, like if you had to remove a commit, it actually rewrites all the history. But
Repos?
what?
Tree filter.
I've used it. Filter branches.
Filter branches. That's yeah. So so let's say now I've made a bunch of commits to my main repo, and some of them involve the subrepo. I can actually use that command to find all of the commits that touch that subrepo and pull that out into an area, and then I can rebase it over the upstream and push it back. So this is all normal stuff to the repo. The repo is not in any, doesn't know that this is any different content, but there's enough clues that this command can go out and do the right things. It can pull in the new content into that subdirectory and push out the changed content. And what I usually do is I try, as a good maintainer, I try to make separate commits for things that touch the subrepos, because then I'll get a commit message that doesn't really, I want that commit message to make sense upstream. So that puts a little onus on me to not just, to make smaller commits. Yeah. So I want to try to do one command, and it'll probably take me the remaining 2 minutes. So I'm gonna. This is going to be fun. This is okay. So this is a repo. This is actually this talks repo, and let's. Okay. Oh, I should delete those. GitHub repo. So the @ sign is the Ingy.net. Okay, so I deleted that one and this one. Okay. And let's just get the first 5 of these. Oops. -C5. Okay. Now, I want to get them in their raw form. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take 5 random repos and make them subrepos of this repo. I'm just not going to push it, so it doesn't matter. All I have to do is get reset hard back to where I started before. I mean, you're just playing with stuff and throwing it away. And you got to get used to that when you're doing with Git. It's just like, as long as you don't push anything, you haven't affected anything. So, and I was telling him earlier, you can actually git clone .git. Here, I'll do it right now. Git subrepo clone .git. That's the URL. And I'm going to take the branch. Well, I don't have multiple branches here, so I'll just rename it, and I'll put it into the directory foo. Yeah, so right. A little power work there. Yeah, so now I've just created a subrepo of myself into the directory foo, and if I list out foo, it'll be the same thing as is in here, except minus the foo. So that was kind of cool. So you could actually check out all of your branches as subrepos into the same repo if you wanted to. That's useful for GH pages if you use that and you want to have it in your master as a subdir. But let's go back to what I was trying to do. So okay, so and then I can pipe this to git repo get. So I want to get a certain field. I want to get the repo information. Repo get. And take the minus, and then I want I think SSH URL. GitHub repo get. Okay, so that's going to give me those the URLs to clone. Now I'm going to say, since I'm a bash expert, I can do this. I'm going to say for URL in all of those 5 repos, do git subrepo clone $URL. I really need that live demo thing. And done. I think that'll work. Git sub. Yeah, why not? Let's give it a whirl. Wait for it. No, it just yeah, it doesn't actually. The clone doesn't show the same information of all the spinning stuff. So I get a little meta. I cloned myself into myself from upstream, or from GitHub. But we'd already done that, so it wasn't that exciting to you guys. And then, so let's look at the history. These are all the subrepo clones that I did. This is a smooth history. I can. I'll show you. So there was parts of the GitHub history. So there's some little bumps in it, right? If you see a messy history, it gets. You can see down at the bottom histories. I've seen histories blow out this wide, you know, because people don't realize they're just merging and merging and merging and never. But yeah, there's some points in the history. You know, lately I've kept it really clean, but every once in a while, some bumps get in. I don't worry about it too much. But this history is completely clean that you see right there. So it pulled in the whole history of all of those repos, chopped off the last thing. It actually merged it, and then, I forget how I did it, and then amended it somehow to, anyway. I did it.
That's when if you push these changes, somebody else clones it, and then they'll get those 5.
Yeah, sure. I can, yeah. I mean, this is not that important of a repo to me. It's just the talk for this thing. So, yeah, you can clone that repo at the top of my Ingy.net list, and you'll see all of those. And so, one thing that's kind of interesting is, I'll show you the git subrepo status. So this shows you the information about all the git subrepos that are in there. And you don't, and I'll show you tab completion works. See that? Tab completion. You can actually, I think, yeah, that's all the commands. Boom. Status. Yeah. Okay, so that's pretty much all I want to show. Oh, there is one little difference. A subrepo has a .git repo file in it, and that's one thing that I added. So you'll never have one of those at the top, and the reason that's cool is because you can make a subrepo that has a bunch of subrepos, you pull that in, and now it adds, if there was a .git repo at the top, that would be a problem. But they're only in the subrepos that you've cloned into your project. And so if I cat out .git, this contains just the information that I need to do other commands and that kind of stuff. So, any questions on Git subrepo?
So not having it, is that just partly to avoid cycle detection, or do you have to worry about cycles because you're just making a copy, right?
Yeah, well, do you have to worry about cycle detection with, like, if A made B a subrepo and then B pulled back in A?
Yeah,
I don't think that would cause any problem whatsoever, no.
because they're just kind of copied in, right? You might duplicate content, but
We can easily test this up in the room afterwards, yeah. But, I mean, yeah, you shouldn't be actually afraid to play with that at all. Just create 2 repos locally. Yeah, I mean, so like when you git clone something, it doesn't have to be a URL. It can just be a .git thing. Like I could say git-subrepo clone. Yes, that's a lot. Okay, we'll take acmeism cog. Have no idea what that is. So that's a URL. It should be, oh, maybe. I guess that one wasn't even a repo. So this is a repo. I can just subrepo, I can clone that, but I don't need a URL. So, yeah, and so now I have that acmeism talk as a subdirectory under there. And, you know, I can make another subrepo under foo. I can rename the directory foobar. And the cool thing about this is when you move stuff around, it's just part of your history, so it really doesn't get confused. And when you make branches of something, it's all part of the stuff. So you can actually pull on one branch and not have your master branch updated or whatever. It all does what you're going to expect. I really haven't found any place where this just sadly lets me down. It's like, oh, this really sucks. It really kind of holds up pretty well. So. Anything else? Or you want to go get lunch?
One more question.
Yes.
When you jump into a directory that's got a subrepo and you do a git push, where does that go?
So you have to do all of the git subrepo stuff from the top level directory now, because I just made that a choice. It's always been a choice to be able to do it from anywhere, and it should do the right thing, but it doesn't currently. So pull requests accepted. All right, well, thanks.